When we think of American soldiers, we picture guys in sand or green uniforms armed with M4 or M16 rifle. But few people know that there are units in the US Army that are on regular duty with AK rifles. They operate on Soviet armored vehicles, and what's more, they are fully trained to act like Russian units. These special battalions are called OPFOR, which stands for Opposing Force. As the OPFOR soldiers themselves like to say, we are professional villains. So how are these units organized, and why are they really hated by many other soldiers in the US Army? So, it all started in the mid-70s. At the time, the military came to the conclusion that the Warsaw-pact countries had numerical superiority over the United States, an almost technological parity. Something had to be done about it, and soon the solution was found. If it was impossible to significantly increase the number of troops and material equipment, then it was necessary to go to a radically new level in the training of soldiers. So the concept of training centers appeared, where whole battalions could conduct training battles with a conditional enemy, which would be close to the real ones. This would make it possible to work out the weaknesses of one's own army to the maximum extent possible, and to identify the weaknesses of the enemy's tactics. As a result, the National Training Center was established at Fort Irwin in 1980. For the most thorough data collection and analysis, the entire area was equipped with fixed and mobile cameras. Observer controllers were stationed near each unit to monitor troop activity. To record the hit, soldiers were equipped with multiple integrated laser engagement system, or MILES. When a blank round was fired, the laser on the weapon would send a signal, and sensors on the soldiers' equipment or uniforms would pick them up when they were hit. But filling an entire range with sensors and dividing the soldiers into a friend team and a foe team was not enough. Training of a new level required the creation of a special unit that would fully imitate the likely enemy. That's how OPFOR came to be. At first, they were assembled from the 6th Battalion of the 31st Infantry Division and the 1st Battalion of the 73rd Armored Division. They were armed and organized as a Soviet motorized rifle regiment and were given the name 32nd Guards. They received black berets, helmets, and dark green uniforms with red epaulets and stars. They were armed with AK rifles and RPG-7 grenade launchers. OPFOR soldiers and officers began to be trained to operate in accordance with the Eastern Bloc doctrine and tactics. Unlike the covert maneuvers of the US Army, OPFORs trained in direct, swift attacks using a mass of armored vehicles and infantry. The military studied Soviet ideology and propaganda thoroughly, and orders among themselves and over the radio were laid in Russian. Every soldier had to eat, sleep, and live in barracks as if he were really a Russian soldier. A lot of work was also done on the equipment. Since it was almost impossible to get hold of Soviet equipment, the VSMOD complex was created, which means visually modified. These are, in fact, decorative parts for American equipment, which allows to change its appearance and become similar to the Russian. Helicopter and fighter jets were simply repainted under the Soviet camouflage with red stars, but with ground vehicles, everything is much more creative. In the beginning, the basis for everything was the M551 Sheridan tank. It could take the image of a T-72 tank, infantry fighting vehicle BMP-1, anti-aircraft weapon system Zu-23-4 Shilka, and self-propelled artillery 2S1. As time went on, more and more equipment was used. Thus, the M113 armored personnel carrier imitated the Soviet BMP-2, the Abrams tank imitated the Russian T-80, and the Humvee vehicle took the image of the BRDM-2. There were also original Soviet vehicles. For example, several BTR-60s and MTLBs that had been captured in Vietnam or the Middle East. Today there are 3 OPFOR units, 1 regiment at NTC, 1 battalion at GRTC, Louisiana, and another battalion based at the GRMC Training Center in Hohenfels, Germany. The look of today's OPFORs has also changed. Today they use Bulgarian AR-M1 rifles in 5.56x45 caliber that mimic the AK-74M and AK-74, and instead of Soviet uniforms, they use tiger stripe or 3-color desert camouflage, solid color black, or a live green uniform. OPFOR units are among the best trained in the US Army and carry a double burden. training to US standards and to Russian army standards. But why do many soldiers from conventional units hate UPFOR? At first, many see it as beautiful entertainment, a polygon dotted with electronics and different targets. However, this attraction quickly turns into a nightmare for any commander. When you realize that you have 150 armored vehicles coming at you at 20 miles per hour and you only have one chance to get it right, it makes you nervous. In the early days, UPFORs were so good that many battalion commanders who encountered them at training were afraid of them. They seriously feared that such training centers would become a place of destruction for the military careers of many officers. As the UPFOR soldiers themselves like to say, we are professional villains. UPFOR have a numerical advantage and know the terrain like the back of their hand. They ambush soldiers at night and make them wait for them under every bush. They use all methods of combat during training battles. They can disguise themselves as civilians, drive up in a pickup truck and pretend to change the wiring on a lamppost, actually collecting information about the enemy passing by. All in all, it's a real cold shower for other military personnel. When faced with UPFOR, it is required to give your best, because these guys will not give in. That's all for today. Thank you guys for watching. This was Casper, and we'll see you next week.